Okay. Roll call.
Carol Young.
Here.
Scott McClory is absent. Tim Sharota.
Here.
Okay, we are here for the discussion and possible decision regarding conducting a classification and compensation study in 2023.
All right. So and I think, was there a second agenda item too about the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure. So since the last meeting with the HR committee, we have done more work based upon kind of the guidance that HR committee gave last time in terms of looking at the comparable wage data from the Lake Geneva study, the Delavan study, and Janesville study, but more specifically the Janesville study, because that's what you guys wanted us to target. So we have put together a proposed step structure, and obviously depending on how you feel about that and the data we have, we would definitely look for guidance from you on whether you want us to include the wage study in our budget for next year, whether you are comfortable, want to proceed in-house with what we have devised. But so kind of at the last meeting, we talked about how Janesville was the target that you wanted us to look at for wages. One of the challenges, and actually once started actually trying to figure it out, is that we were missing a lot of data from Janesville because they didn't necessarily study all the same positions we have, and you can kind of tell in that far right column that if you don't see any green percentages or any green numbers in that far right column, there's no data. So they didn't have any real data for a lot of their library or park positions, and so it was just a little bit tough because we weren't matching the same kind of positions necessarily from top to bottom. So in terms of that bottom right corner number where we were trying to target 10%, we actually ended up at 0.34%, and I'll explain why. But when creating a step structure, obviously every pay grade is based upon the pay grade above it. Every pay grade is, at least under the city's existing salary schedule that we currently have, every pay grade is 6% of the pay grade above it. So in putting together a proposed step structure, stayed with that number. So in terms of every step every pay grade was going to be 6%. And of course you have to start with the very, very top. And so what I did is, you'll see that on the right, you'll see the Janesville study, their top range was 101 to 137 was their top pay grade for the range. So I used the same the same range just as a starting point. I looked at trying to do something. It was kind of weird because if you wanted to get that bottom percentage, that 10% we talked about before, the only way you could do that, the only way you're going to get that number up is if you reduce this top 101 number lower, because everything is ties to it. But the challenge is if I took a top number that was lower than 101, then you're going to be close to the Delavan study of 97.5, which was from 2020, and we know the Delavan numbers were lower, than what we're definitely the lowest of the bunch. So that's the reason why, unfortunately, when I put this pay structure together, or step structure, trying to hit that 10% was just not really feasible because it's all dictated by whatever your top number is, and I really couldn't go any lower as a top number than the 101 to 137 range. So I'm just going to sort of put that out there to kind of explain how we got here. But so the first thing was, like I said, setting up that top pay range of 101 to 137, and then using the existing pay grades that the city had, and basically just, like I said, every pay grade would be 6% of the pay grade above it. You'll see that there are some sections that are highlighted in blue. The reason they're highlighted is because it reflects that there's something different from the city's existing salary schedule that needs to be updated or changed, or that is changed in the proposed revised ranges. And the ranges that you'll see on the left side of the screen there are the ranges that would be proposed to use for our step structure, which I'll show you in a second, a tab in a second. But just to see kind of how you got to the tab that I'll show specifically in a minute. You'll see anyway, the things that are in blue, like, I'll take myself, for example, city administrator wasn't included in the city's prior wage or salary schedule, so, um, thought it made sense to add me. If you don't want to add me, that's fine. Um, but you'll see the director of public works, that was just a title change, because it was listed as operations manager for public works. So that'd be something we'd have to make sure that the actual job title for the job description matches that. But so that's, if you see the blue, those are things that or have been changed or added, and I've got a summary kind of at the end of summarizing everything that did change. But um, for example, I mean, I guess I can just highlight some other ones. Assistant finance director, that was just a title that needed to be fixed because the current salary schedule described as an account manager treasurer. The utility field office coordinator wasn't included on the city's existing, and that position is currently held by Dawn right now, and that's not on our city's salary schedule. The recreation supervisor, under the existing structure, is called the recreation recreation coordinator. So, but she was hired as a recreation supervisor. And the city has an engineering tech who also wasn't included under the existing schedule. So those positions got added. And once I really dove into the data and looked at some of those percentages we talked about before, where you look at some of those percentages for our positions that were significantly, let's say, under let's say the Janesville numbers, for example. For those positions, a few of them, I adjusted the pay grades, like up or down one, in order to try and even out some of those percentages that were really significant one way or the other. And then I looked a lot at, I got, stack of pay studies, not only for, Delavan, Geneva, and Janesville, and how they, what their pay grades were like for positions, but also it looked at, cities throughout Wisconsin, and, using that information, like I said, I made a couple tweaks here and there to the extent, that seemed necessary to make everything all fit. And so that's kind of how the ranges got put together. And then in terms of the actual steps themselves, that I will show here. And first off, just wanted to clarify one thing, that, again, this, when we were putting together the pay ranges, the council, you guys had indicated, or the HR committee had recommended that we take into account the health insurance. So we, did do that. And I'll actually switch back over to this one. The percentages you see in terms of how we compare with other cities, those percentages, like, let's say, okay, for, we've got, for the Janesville study, which showed the pay range for our finance director would be about 11.5% under the pay range for Janesville's, data, and that's taking into account the value of our health insurance as well in there. So if you were to take out the, $4,500 for health insurance, that 11.56% number is going to go up, because, that you're not taking that into consideration anymore. And one thing I did want to just alert is, when we talked last time, we were using a higher value for the health insurance. We talked about maybe using around 6,000, because we were figuring in that a family plan is 3,000 a month, and if employees had to pay 10 to 15% of the monthly premiums, then that would be about $5,500 over the course of the year, plus the HRA of $500. But when I found some data from West Bend. They did a salary study this past year, and I think that's listed at the bottom right here. And these were the premiums that some of the different cities they surveyed were charging. One caveat is, some of the cities had multiple plans, so they would have, like, the cheapest plan, a mid-range plan, and a higher range, and they would charge different premiums based upon it. So these aren't necessarily, every single one of these isn't necessarily a different city, but there's a good, a pretty good range of cities. I mean, if you average what those cities were charging for premiums, it ends up being $3,900, which I've got right here. So that's the average premiums that other cities are charging for their health insurance. So I use that number as the value of our plan to the employees because they're not paying any premiums for that. And I also added the $500 for the HRA contribution. So moving back to the actual step structure, you'll see when we talked last time, it seemed like the HR committee, you guys favor a smaller steps if we we're going to do something. So I looked at other cities. The average step was typically around 2.5%, but some cities would start at 3 and then it would go down to 2 at the end, and some would, so it wasn't necessarily like 2.5, each year. It was kind of maybe 3 down to 2, and some cities it was more consistent. But needless to say, the proposed structure we have here, the steps would be 2%, which, the benefit to the city is that it's going to give the city more and the council more flexibility in terms of adapting to future economic trends, but also, financially what the city can afford. So the steps would be 2% a year. Now, because you've got only a 2% step, then rather than having, let's say, a 10-step, 10-year structure, it'd be the proposal would be 15 total steps. So you're spreading it out over time. And in looking at the ranges that other cities used, most cities had a range from when I say range, I mean the difference between the minimum step and the top step. Most cities were at least at 30%, and so I've got that here. Let's see, ours, and this is something I need to update, but under the proposed steps we've got here, the average spread for the city would be 34.6%. It says 32.9, but I need to update that. It'd be 34.6, and if you look at like Lake Geneva, their spread was 30%, but Lake Geneva had a 30%, and then let's see. Fond du Lac also had 30%, but theirs was over 11 steps. Marshfield had 30.5% over 11 steps. And then Janesville was a 35% spread, and Oshkosh was 37. So the 34.6 over technically 15 years is kind of right in the middle of those spreads. So, and that, those are some of the main highlights. And of course, I guess the most important thing is what's the cost. So, and with that, I have to say, Corey was very, very helpful with trying to calculate the cost. I kind of did the first part of trying to create the ranges, but once I got done with that, Corey was very instrumental in putting together some very helpful charts to figure out how to, where employees would be and what then the cost would be to the city to actually put employees on those steps. And I think, as I mentioned last time, under the proposal, every employee would basically put on the step that's closest to their current pay without going backwards. So that's the proposal. The one caveat is that there were about 7 employees who were so close to their existing step that they're like 0.08% from their current step, or the step that they would go on, that if they only had a 2% step for 2023, they'd be getting less than the 2.5 that they otherwise would have gotten. So to avoid having anybody fare worse under the proposal, for those people, we effectively bumped them up. I say 2 steps, but it's because they were basically on the step that they would have otherwise gone to. So that's the one caveat to that. So that's how people would get on the steps, and then everybody on their merit date would get, assuming they had a satisfactory job performance from their supervisor, just like under the existing plan or the city's current policy. Supervisors would have to approve it, and they would get that later in the year on their anniversary date. And so that's one thing. The overall cost to implement this, and in terms of not only people getting on the steps, but then the impact over the course of the year, we estimate that the total cost would be $122,000, and that's across all funds. The impact on the actual general fund, which is, the tax levy is 68,725.05, which, we had budgeted approximately $120,000 from the general fund to try and implement a structure. So we're coming in almost not quite half, but pretty close to half of what we were budgeting. So that definitely was sort of the good news. One slight caveat to that is we did get a notice recently that our worker comp premiums for next year are going to be higher than we anticipated by about 30,000. So you take that out of the 120 we have budgeted, and it leaves us with, let's say, 90, and then we take out the 68, and we still have 20-some thousand to spare. Furthermore, if we don't do the wage study, that's going to save another $7,500. So all told, we would have about, we'd have about looks like 21,000 would be the net from what we budgeted. If you implement the step structure and you pay the extra cost of the workers' comp, we'd have about 20,000 to spare from that 120, 127 number. And then we had budgeted for the city overall right now about 28,000 in reserves. So, you're looking at almost 50,000, and we'd have in reserves for the year. So that's the cost. And the one thing I did want to clarify too about the cost is that 68,000 number. I'm going to use 68 because that's tax levy money, but that's assuming that all employees got paid their new, that's assuming that all employees got their merit increase on January 1. So clearly not all employees are getting their merit increase on January 1 because it's going to be based upon their anniversary date. So that cost is actually going to be less than the 68 because, I'm going to say, I'll pick on Matt here, but our public works director, his anniversary date's actually in the fall. So his new merit increase for 2023, he's not going to get until fall of 23. So you're not going to be paying that new rate all year long. So that 68,000 will be less, but we didn't necessarily want to get that specific in terms of the cost estimate until we got feedback from you. But in terms of calculating everybody's specific anniversary date, so we just figured, okay, what's the most we could possibly have to pay, which would be the 68 number. So I guess I will stop at that point and ask if the HR committee has any questions, comments about some of the ranges or steps.
Couple things I'm just not clear on. I really appreciate all the hard work you, Corey and Adam, you did on this. It's tremendous, and I think this is what we were looking for. These step increases are tied, you get the 15 steps are annual, according to your anniversary date.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, and what happens at the 16th year?
Yeah, so on the 16th year, you would then be, your future wage increases would be tied to the cost of living adjustment that the council would have to approve every year. And so one advantage of doing smaller 2% steps is then it gives the council more flexibility for those people who have, let's say, hit the top, that, you've got more room to do a, 1.5% or whatever that number ends up being. You've got more flexibility on that, so.
Is that cost of living wages have done in the past, where it's built into the budget like a 2.5% raise January 1st every year?
Well, the city hasn't been doing any cost of living adjustments.
I didn't think we ever
Yeah.
called it that, but we've given the employees a raise.
The employees have gotten up to a 2.5% merit increase every year, and that's on their anniversary date. So there's been no sort of, yeah.
Everybody, but it's not. Okay?
So
This completely replaces that except for the 16th year.
correct, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, this would be where, I'm going to say hypothetically, January 1, all employees would, in the future, not in 23, but in the future, would get the council, whatever COLA the council approves, that'd be take effect January 1. So everybody, let's say it's 1%. So all employees, January, get that 1%. Then their merit date comes around, their anniversary date, I should say. If they get the merit increase and the step, at that point, the step increase, then they'd get that adjustment. That's kind of how it's going to work for most employees. And then for those that reach that step 15, step 16, then they're going to be tied to that, whatever the COLA that's approved by the council on January 1. So.
But I know he's got a later date
Yeah.
in the year. Sorry. uh, what's his situation January 1st? I mean, does he get that merit increase and then waits to get a 2% increase on his next step
He gets
in the fall?
he would get the COLA on January 1 along with all city employees, and then on his anniversary date, then that's when he'd be eligible for the 2.5, I'm sorry, the 2% step, which is no different than what we're doing now because all employees, the only increase employees are eligible for under the current compensation plan is just on their anniversary date. So, under the current system, Matt has to wait till, you know, October, November for any pay increase under the current plan anyway. So that wouldn't change. So it would just be rather than having up to a 2.5%, it'd be 2% for that, but then it's because you're going to be getting a potential COLA on January of the year, January 1. And because under the current proposal, all employees are going to be put on the steps by giving them sort of the benefit of the doubt in terms of the next highest step. That's why we're not proposing doing a COLA for 23 because all employees are getting at least 0.5 to 1% just to get on the steps, which effectively is, and because all the pay ranges would be shifting, and employees are definitely coming out ahead. So that's why we're not suggesting doing a COLA for 23, but then starting in 24, yeah, there'd be a COLA January of each year.
And then you had mentioned that early on you said with the numbers that we were just at a 0.34 something increase and we were shooting for a 10%. I assume some other wages went down. You indicated you were going to talk about that later.
So before, let me go back to that sheet. Before we were, that 10% number, we were, the Janesville data was, you guys wanted us to, because the last time we talked, Janesville was on average like 12 to 15% above where the city was. And so we were going to try to be around 10% of where Janesville was. But the problem was because there was no way to, in order to get that 10% number, we would have to lower all of the ranges for the city from what's been proposed here. And the only way you could do that is if you lower the top number even further. And so, or I guess you'd have to drastically reduce everybody's pay grades, which I don't think you guys want to do either. So to avoid having to do some massive, change in pay grades and dropping pay grades, and really being kind of limited by that top number in terms of really, I honestly couldn't lower the top number anymore. I mean, I guess I could, but then we're going to be going backwards from where, even where Delavan, let's say, was in 2020. So that's why it was just really hard to actually try and hit that 10% number. So, and as I said too, we are missing, quite a bit of data. So if you were to plug in more data from Janesville, they might be, that 0 or 0.5% might actually be higher. I mean, they may be paying higher for some of their positions than we are for, some of their, library and park and rec positions. I just don't know because that wasn't included in their survey. But if you want to, if you want to look at Geneva, for example, I'm just going to use them because Lake Geneva, although their numbers were high, they did at least have a lot more data similar to the positions we have. And you can see that under the proposed ranges we're using, we would still be about 6.7% lower than them. And that's, again, taking into consideration the 40.
Health insurance is built into
Yeah,
that.
so
Okay.
it actually, if you took the health insurance out, that percentage would be more like, 10 or 11%. So that hopefully gives you some comfort that we're not, let's say, proposing something that's, out of range, let's say, or significantly higher than, let's say, Geneva. And I can just tell you that the average increase for getting the employees on the steps would be 3% for next year. And then, of course, everybody would be eligible for their 2% increase. So, and that's an average, and there's definitely some variations just because we had About 21 employees would be below the minimum. Of those, though, 10 are actually in the library. And that's actually a whole different, it's going to be the library board's going to have to decide what they want to do. In part two, because, and that's one thing I meant to mention, that the cost estimate we gave you is assuming that the library participates and assuming that their part-time employees participate, which, it's not my recommendation that they participate because, you know, if those part-time employees participate and you got an employee in the library working, basically 10 hours a week, should they be getting an annual step increase when, it's tied to your anniversary date and how, it's for somebody who's worked 40 hours a week for the full year, is that kind of a fair thing to do? But ultimately, it's the library board's decision to, I guess, I mean, they've got to pay for it, but, so my plan is to talk to the library board tomorrow, actually, just to kind of tell them, obviously, what your feedback is and where we might be going, but that's just something else to consider in terms of the cost estimate.
I guess I've been on the library board for a lot of years. Is that $68,000 number you have, does that include the library employees, or are they
Yes.
carved out of there?
Yeah, that includes them, yeah.
But not the part-time people?
Oh, it includes part-time too.
Okay.
We gave you a cost estimate that includes everybody, but
Okay.
some of those employees could get taken out, presumably.
Because the library kind of stands alone fiscally, even though we all know how tied in they are with the city. Will their budget sustain, this kind of step structure and going up, or haven't you had that conversation yet?
Well, and I think it's going to be depending on how much the council approves allocating how much tax levy every year to the library. I mean, and that's something that's one of the things I think the library board needs to keep in consideration too, when they've got a lot of part-time employees, and is that something they want to continue doing long-term? I don't know. But I mean, the good thing is the steps are 2%. So, I mean, yes, they potentially could have a COLA too, but, right now, employees are eligible for up to 2.5%. So you're not talking necessarily a huge dramatic percentage increase from year to year, but it's still, like you said, an extra cost. Yeah.
And are you going to attend the library board meeting tomorrow night?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's great. The city administrators have avoided the library for decades in this town. So that's great. Are you looking for a recommendation to move this on to the council?
Yes, at this time, that'd be helpful. If you guys, yeah, that's what we're looking for. Yep.
Ready for a motion, or?
If you are,
Well, I'd like to make a motion that this gets approved by the HR committee and moved on to the full council.
second the motion.
The item, or,
Number
okay.
one.
That's the conducting a classification and compensation study for 2023. So is that,
I think we're looking at, I guess, and obviously there's pros and cons in doing the wage study. I understand, Alderman Alderman McClory is, expressed concerns about doing that, and I know some of you as well. So again, I'm not going to sort of provide an opinion one way or the other, what you guys want to do about the wage study. What I guess would help us for budgeting purposes for next year would be a decision to move this forward to the council for the actual step structure. Now, again, if you do the step structure as proposed, then it would negate the need to do the wage study.
Because that was my intention.
Okay.
With the motion, so.
And I will say, I did meet with Alderman McClory and the mayor actually last week, just because Alderman McClory was going to be unavailable for today. So he was in support of moving this forward as well. But I do want to let you know he has been apprised. But
Work, I mean, that was a lot.
so then do we have a motion regarding conducting a classification and compensation study in 2023? Do we want to bypass that one? Do you not want to
I
forward
think-
that on to the council?
I think my motion was that in place of doing a 2023 wage and study, whatever you're calling it,
We want to adopt and implement the pace.
we'd like to move on the step schedule presented to us, to the full council.
Oh, are we doing this again? All right. Okay, I make a motion, we adjourn.
Well, I think we
Well,
gotta
you have to
vote.
vote
We
first.
Oh,
gotta
we have to
in
vote.
there.
Oh, we have to do the vote, okay.
So Tim's motion, Carol seconds. Everyone's in
All
favor?
say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It just seems silly because there's only two of us.
I know, that's the way you do it.
I know.
The second item on the agenda wasn't there two?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first one was doing the classification and compensation study. But I don't feel you guys want to move that on to council.
No.
So I don't really know what we do with that one.
I mean, if there's just no motion or a motion not to move forward, I mean, either way is fine. I mean,
So we just had the one. And that's all we have on the agenda.
I move we adjourn.
I second that.
All in favor?